I'll hand it over to you, Tom.
Great. Thank you, Wade. I'll start off with a little, I guess, backstory, if you will. As I mentioned last week, that I'm not used to giving presentations in front of a monitor. I'm typically standing in front of a room of, a small group or a large group of people. So if I stumble at all through this, I apologize. It's just not in my wheelhouse to do online presentations. But I don't have the same experience doing it this way as I've done, visiting and going to the APF conferences or PIA conferences. So if I'm off a little bit, I apologize, but that's what it's for, or that's what it's from. And I'll do my best to try to keep this flow moving at a good pace. By all means, this conversation is probably more dynamic than last week. Last week, it was essentially just observations and experiences of extreme condition skydiving, whereas this is a more practical application of our daily lives in tandem skydiving. So as questions come up, please don't hesitate to interrupt me, stop me, and we can address whatever you want to address at that point. Otherwise, at the end, we'll have time for question and answer as well. And ultimately, these are all just opinions. I have the opportunity to learn from a global field of tandem instructors and examiners and drop zone owners and federations. And truly it is just that. I'm learning from other people's experiences. So I'll do my best to condense that and summarize the experiences that I've learned from. So basically what I'm saying is, well, I may be speaking from a position of authority. In one regard, it really isn't a position of authority, it's a position of community. And I'm just the lucky, blessed one that has the opportunity to be able to share this information. So don't take anything I say for fact. Of course, challenge anything and everything. And ultimately, what I say in any educational environment like this, it doesn't matter whether you agree with me or disagree with me. At the end of the session, if you guys are discussing this and drawing your own conclusions as to whether I was right or wrong, as long as you're continuing to talk about it, understanding why you have the position you have, and most importantly, sharing it to the others that weren't able to attend this, that's the real measure of success in any kind of endeavor like this. I'm making an investment in time to share information with you, but you're making an equally, if not more important investment in your time to sit and receive that information. So I see that, acknowledge that from the beginning, and I thank you for the opportunity, and I respect that. So I hope this will be some value to you as we discuss what's going on in the tandem world for the next hour or so. I only have one video. The rest of the presentation is a PowerPoint presentation that I'll be talking through as we go through it. But I will start with the video because it gives me an opportunity to practice sharing my desktop screen. And it also basically shows you the only real way we can get through the COVID-19 crisis and maintain our social distancing standards in terms of not communicating this disease to anyone. So let me share my screen, share sound, optimize for full screen video clip. I think that is that. And then I share my desktop. Okay, can you guys see my desktop?
Yeah, mate.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm visible. All right, let's put this up there. Hopefully the audio will work, and I've learned from the last one.
Yep.
Can you hear it?
Yep.
Beautiful.
Yep.
right. Well, the reason I showed that video, one, is a great little audio video presentation to get everybody's attention, but truly it is the only way to avoid COVID-19 transmission is to wear an oxygen mask and cover your eyes. So short of the world shifting to halo skydiving, which I think would be awesome. It's just not practical at this point in our careers and in our industry, but really the separation of our personal space versus the person beside us, our own atmospheres, if you will, it's really the only way to truly 100% prevent the transmission of any kind of virus, COVID-19 or otherwise, in the type of close proximity that we are in. So the bad news, if you want to call it that, is that it doesn't matter where you are in the world, whatever your social distancing standards are, skydiving and especially tandem skydiving are counterintuitive to every one of them, especially tandem skydiving. We're attaching ourselves to our passengers. We're violating the 6-foot rule or the 2-meter rule every time we make a tandem skydive. And we are also potentially going to come into contact with the most number of potentially contagious people as we meet our one-time customers throughout the day, 5 tandems, 10 tandems, 20 tandems, and so on. So tandem skydiving and COVID-19 are not good pairing. They're not good partners. That being said, tandem skydiving is back. And just speaking from my own personal observation, here in the United States, drop zones, a handful of them chose not to shut down during the initial state-by-state stay-at-home orders. They were no violation of any state laws. I'd probably say 98% of our drop zones here in the US shut down, but a handful of them stayed open. A perfectly legal and personal business decision to decide to maintain their business, and they maintained tandems through that time period to no ill effect of their drop zone and or any regulatory issues with their local states and municipalities. So there has been skydiving and tandem skydiving through this COVID issue we've been dealing with, albeit on a very, very small scale, too small to draw any kind of conclusions from on a macro level, but it has happened. And now as drop zones are starting to reopen, the volumes of tandems, I think, are higher than anyone ever would have expected. I think 1 to 2 months of stay-at-home orders, people are so excited for human contact and to get out into the world again that they're actually looking for this sort of death-defying experience to offset the month or 2 months or 3 months that they spent at home without getting much outdoor activity. So that's effectively my preface for the presentation. And by the way, I hope you guys noticed that was Ozzy flying the wingsuit in that video. Not to embarrass him, but to my knowledge, Ozzy was our first wingsuit flyer in the Himalaya all those years ago. So that's a pretty cool accolade to have, the first person to fly a wingsuit through the Himalaya. It's pretty awesome.
Thanks, brother.
So with that, I'm going to run my presentation on the new normal, as I call it. How is tandem skydiving post-pandemic? And truly, we're not even out of a pandemic yet. We're flattening the curve, we're lowering the curve, whatever you want to call it. And thankfully, we are seeing less and less people becoming sick from this, but it's still there. We still have this issue. But as we get better collectively as a people, and as we get healthier, as we get past this, we're going to emerge into a new normal, if you will, of tandem skydiving. And how long that new normal lasts, whether it's months or years, still remains to be seen. But I'm going to take this opportunity now to discuss with you the things that I've seen during that time, or during the last few months. And I've had a number of conversations with drop zone owners around the world, done a handful of podcast or other Zoom meetings with James LeBarry from Beyond Marketing, and we've talked about some other issues. So I'm going to kind of incorporate some of the things that I learned through those conversations as well. But before I begin, I have to issue a stern warning. I don't know anything about infectious diseases. Myself, my coworkers, we are some of the world's best producers of parachute equipment. None of us have any area of expertise in infectious disease transmission, be it the COVID-19, be it influenza, whatever. So therefore, we can't give you any facts, we can't give you any recommendations, any firm rules or regulations, simply because we don't have the background to do so. So rather than give you recommendations or requirements or regulations, my goal is to simply give you considerations. I will share information. You can then take those considerations, choose to use them, choose not to use them. I say as part of my disclaimer, you could choose to use every one of these considerations, and it could still have a zero effect on the transmission rate of COVID-19 at your drop zone or amongst your population of skydivers. None of this is guaranteed to work, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So now that I've got that out of the way, who am I? Just a quick background on why I'm here with you. And I like this photo because, again, I was social distancing before it was cool. In this case, it was actually cold. The idea of wearing face masks or buffs, this photo was taken from Antarctica. And I believe the exit temperature was minus 40 Celsius. Can't even begin to calculate how cold it was once we got into the airflow, probably somewhere at minus 60 Celsius. It was cold. So we doubled up, tripled up on buffs or face masks. This was 2 years ago. So before everybody's been required to do it, we were doing this already with Skydive Antarctica. Buffs are good, and we'll talk about them a little bit later, but they're not the perfect solution. They're just one option you have in both tandem skydiving and simply in skydiving in general as well, to help lower the transmission, but not eliminate it. So real quick background on who I am. I've been working for UPT for about 7 years now, work with Bill Booth and Mark Prokos. I manage the Tandem program for the company. We have drop zones and end users and instructors and examiners on all 6 continents. And we get feedback from all 6 continents on every aspect of Tandem. So that's where a lot of this information comes from. I've been working with Ever Skydive for the last, one on 2008, so last 13 years or so. That's where I first was introduced to Halo skydiving and why I'm such an advocate of it now. My teammate Paul Henry DeBar and I, we own and operate Skydive Earth, where we focus on trying to take extraordinary people like you to extraordinary places in the world to go skydiving. Just this last year, I was able to make my 7th continent, jumping on Antarctica for 2018, I think it was. And I've traveled and jumped in over 20 countries. So I offer that simply to illustrate that I've worked in different environments. I've met a lot of extraordinary people in different places in different parts of the world. So pretty well-rounded understanding of what our global skydiving economy looks like for tandem jumping. And then of course, we do sport Halo events at local drop zones around the world when we can. So that's just my background in 2 minutes or less. Well, let's talk about the important stuff. You guys didn't sit in on this to hear about my resume. You want to learn about what's going on in the world of tandem skydiving. Well, these are the topics we're going to cover. We're going to cover what the new normal looks like today. We're going to talk about equipment use. That's obviously a critical foundation for all of skydiving, but especially tandem skydiving, is how can we use the equipment in the best manner possible to limit transmission of disease and infection. Truthfully, you really can't, but there are some small steps we can do to try to limit that transmission possibility. We'll talk about disinfectants. We'll talk about personal health things we can do. Drop zone process modifications, things that you might have already changed at your drop zone or things that you will change in the future at your drop zone because of the new exposure risk to COVID-19. We will talk about risk mitigation possibilities, things we can do to lower our risk of infection of ourselves and the people around us. Again, as we're closing this presentation, I'll remind everybody these are all just considerations, not recommendations, and why we feel that way. And then at the end, we'll talk about some conclusions and open it up to a question and answer session as well. So the new normal, what is it? I love this photo. This was from September of last year in Poland. We were at 26,500 feet AGL. I think we were around 28,000 feet AGL. It was cold, but the reason we're wearing the masks is that we have our own personal atmospheres because of the altitude. We had low oxygen levels, low oxygen ratio levels, if you will, based on the altitude. So we needed to bring our own personal oxygen supplies. In this photo, I am not transmitting anything to my teammate. He's not transmitting anything to me. I'm fully enclosed. My eyes are covered. With the exception of the exhaust vent on the side of the mask, I am effectively in a closed environment, impenetrable to any other infections, anything going on in the outside world around me. That was both in the aircraft and of course in free fall. But we realized that we can't logistically use Halo tandem systems on every skydive. So with that as a removed possibility, what are some of the things that we can do? Well, Separation of passenger and instructor is not possible in a tandem jump because they have to work together as a team. But what we've seen on the televisions, we've seen on the global news, that while masks are not a perfect scenario, given the size, I forget how many microns size the virus is, that wearing any type of mask lowers the transmission probability. And ultimately, wearing helmets, which we'll get to when we talk about personal equipment, again, not a perfect solution, but separating the air intake and separating our exposure from our eyes and our mouth and our nose from instructor to passenger is a critical component to trying to reduce the probability of a viral transmission. So if you're taking notes, my first suggestion would be assessing, brainstorming your own situation. What is it you can do at your drop zone to limit the interaction? They've said on the news, again, I'm quoting the health experts, that mucous membranes like our nostrils, our eyes, our mouth, those are the danger areas of transmission. I think I read somewhere that we touch our face something like 1,000 times a day without even knowing it. It's just a random habit. So protecting our face, protecting our airways, that's a critical step in reducing the probability of transmission. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this critical skydiving fact. We're talking about a virus that's very, very small, that is exhaled from the body, that is potentially on our hands and our fingers. And we talk about exhalation when we put air into a room, we put air into an aircraft cabin. If you put the coronavirus in the context of someone farting on the airplane, it doesn't matter where that person is on the plane on jump run. If somebody farts, the entire cabin is aware of it, including the pilot, who we'll also come back to. So the idea that we can limit the transmission of any kind of infectious disease in an aircraft, especially with closed doors, is almost zero. Opening the door is probably better than the door being closed, but again, we've all been on aircraft with doors open on jump run and someone farts and you can still smell it. So air is still circulating through the cabin. Some of the considerations we're looking at in terms of equipment are how can we best use our gear with the least amount of transmission probabilities. And this may or may not be possible. Some drop zones have 1 or 2 pieces of equipment and 4 instructors with 2 packers, and it's just a mad rush to get what you can when you can. But we are seeing drop zones attempting to assign tandem systems to individual instructors. So if I have a population of 5 instructors and 10 tandem systems, which is, say, a standard setup at a busy tandem drop zone, each instructor has 2 rigs they're responsible for. A lot of drop zones already operate this way. And then dedicated packers. So the same packer is packing that instructor's equipment each and every time. And all this is doing is it's attempting to limit the crossover of exposure between individual people, individual pieces of equipment, and trying to limit the interactions of person and parachute to the lowest common denominator. Now, some tandem instructors may not want to hear this, but ultimately the best scenario is for a single instructor to take custody of his own parachute system and pack it himself every time after he jumps. One person in charge of one parachute system is half as exposure risk as 2 people, the packer and the instructor. So ideally, that's not going to work on a lot of our turbine drop zones where we have high volume, 100 tandems a day. But at its best case scenario, 1 tandem instructor is responsible for 1 set of equipment. And looking at it from a 6 Degrees to Kevin Bacon, if you guys are familiar at all with that, it's a movie thing from the 1990s. You could find 6 people or 6 different movies of people that were in a movie with Kevin Bacon. Tandem instructors are the Kevin Bacons of the skydiving community, meaning that we're the ones that are in contact with the most number of people. Your packer may be completely healthy, symptom-free, and the only person they're going to interact with throughout the day is you and your tandem system. But if your tandem instructor has interacted with 20 different students and one of those students got your instructor sick and they become infectious, now that packer risks a potential infection, whereas the only person they were working with is you. So thinking about it in that type of context, limiting the exposure of your instructors to those around you and those around the drop zone is a critical point or critical process in trying to reduce the possibility of transmissions. So to continue on with equipment use, sorry, let's move this up here. So to continue on with equipment use, there are things we can do to make ourselves relatively safer than unsafe. For example, I think we're going to see in the post-COVID-19 tandem skydiving world, less and less tandem instructors jumping without a helmet, jumping with open face helmets, jumping with buffs, as opposed to jumping with a full face helmet. For drop zones that require full face helmets, then there are many around the world. Some of them have reported an almost immediate change of instructor sick days from 2, 3, 4 times a month to almost zero with the one simple implementation of going to a full face helmet. While it is not a perfect seal, because as it was pointed out to me earlier today, if it was a perfect seal, the instructors would pass out in the airplane because no oxygen would be getting in and out of the helmet. Even some of today's most modern helmets, for example, in the picture here you see a G3. The new G4s, actually the front vent can be opened and closed. So it is possible to completely vent up, and while it's not an airtight seal, to vent off the entire helmet itself in the aircraft during the climb to altitude. So the thing I like about full face helmets, and why I see that becoming the new normal, the new standard in tandem skydiving, is that one of the first things we spoke about was where is the virus going to get us? It's going to get us in the eyes, in the nose as we breathe in, and in our throats. And at least with a full shield in the aircraft with the shield down, you are physically providing a physical barrier of protection between those points of your face where you risk the highest level of exposure. Now, of course, there are vents. There is breathing that has to be done, so it can't be a sealed system, hermetically sealed. But what we are seeing in the field is instructors wearing buffs, which you see on the left there, up over their nose and their mouth in the aircraft, and then the full face helmet on top of that with the mask down. That is the most common antiviral configuration, if you want to call it that. It's the most common configuration we're seeing instructors moving towards in this new environment. And while it's not a perfect solution, if we're looking at the things that we can do directly to make a dramatic potential change for the better, the full face helmet is probably that one piece. Now, personally, I jumped for almost 20 years with an open face helmet and a buff. I love being able to feel the wind, and it's been a change for me in this last year to get used to being a full-time full face helmet jumper, but I am noticing the difference. And if any of you tandem instructors who've been a tandem instructor long enough, if you can relate to the story of if you've ever been able to tell what type of shampoo your passenger was washed their hair with that morning, because in free fall, the shampoo blew up into your nose. You could smell whatever scent they were washing their hair with. That's just one example of the person-to-person transmissions of whether it's dander, whether it's shampoo, whether it's sweat or other bodily excretions, which we'll get to in a little bit. A face shield is probably going to be your primary best defense in this otherwise indefensible situation that we're in. Now, it's a considerable cost, obviously, for a full face helmet. And the question has come up multiple times, well, should the instructor purchase the helmet? Should the drop zone purchase the helmet? And there's no official consideration for that. Every situation is unique. I've suggested to some drop zones that if you forecast your instructor is going to do 300 tandem jumps in the next year for you, increase the price of the tandem by $1.50, and that will pay for the helmet. The customer would be relatively unaware of the additional $1.50. It's not a big jump in price, but that can afford to pay for the helmet for your instructor, which may ultimately be the difference between that instructor getting sick, not being able to work for you, or worse, that instructor getting sick and continuing to work for you, and passing on the disease from person to person as they continue to work. Because again, we have to remember, a lot of these COVID-19 transmissions, the actual host, if you will, the person that's sick, is non-symptomatic. So if you are an instructor and you would like to wear a full face helmet and you don't have it in your budget because we've all been standing down from tandems for the last few months, bring it up to your drop zone owner. Ask them if they'll incorporate that as a risk mitigation measure. They may say yes, may say no, couldn't hurt to ask. Otherwise, here in the United States, we have a lot of contracting instructors that they're personal contractors. They buy their own personal safety equipment, and then they write it off to the tax man at the end of the year. So those are all options you guys can talk about, look at, but again, not to spend too much time on it. But the idea of going from an open face helmet to a full face helmet, I think, is a step in the right direction in our new normal. Now, you also see there on the picture on the left side above the buff is the gloves. I think that, again, from a protection area perspective, that wearing gloves is going to be another critical component for the instructors, because physical hand contact of things like doorknobs, things like in aircraft. So think about going to the bathroom at the drop zone, someone touches the doorknob, you go in the bathroom after them. That is an infection point, as it has been told on TV. That same person or you then grabs the bar inside the PAC 750 to slide up the back of the plane. You're now infecting the bar. Someone grabs the bar and then touches their face. The potential for infection exponentially increases. So that's the other thing we see instructors moving towards, is wearing gloves when they work. And that was another thing I never typically did, but I've gotten into wearing gloves this last year. There's multiple different brands out there. I won't even go into what types there are because there's so many of them, but looking at wearing gloves and full face helmets and buffs, those three components for the instructor are probably your best bet, best case scenario of personal protective equipment that, with no guarantee to reduce any probability of transmission, give you the best possibility of being in a position to reduce transmission, if that makes sense. Let me get back to that. So that's you, the instructor. The next question is, what about your passengers? The passenger is effectively going to be the contagion. They're the one that is going to bring the virus to you on the drop zone. In theory, that's our biggest concern, that the population of passenger students, they're the ones coming through for the experience that are going to arrive, pass on the virus potentially, and then leave, and then put you in a position to pass on the virus as well. So the question of what can we do for the passengers is the other big question. And again, there's no good answer for any of this, but requiring buffs, requiring face masks, and whether it's a face mask that they wear. I'm sure you guys have riggers in Australia who are making face masks as well. We wear them in grocery stores. And again, we wear them to protect others from us rather than protecting ourselves from others. At least that's what they say. So whether you're giving them a mask or a buff, having the passenger wear a face covering on the aircraft, I would go so far as to say also possibly in free fall if you can. I know a lot of the sale of tandem skydiving is the big smile that we see in free fall, but remember what I said earlier about being able to smell the shampoo that the person you were jumping with had washed their hair with that morning. If you can smell what's coming from their hair, their mouth is passing particles past you that obviously you can't see, but you're getting spit, you're getting fluids from the nose and mouth of the passenger if their face isn't covered during the free fall and drogue fall. And then goggles are the other question. We always provide goggles, but how do we provide goggles in the era of COVID-19 to our passenger? And there's multiple options for this. And again, we have no authority to know any of them is the best or one is better than another. One option, if you believe that the COVID virus takes 3 days to die on its own, having a 3 to 4 day supply of goggles that, in addition to disinfecting them, if you manage 50 tandem passengers on a Friday, that 50 goggles get disinfected on Friday and then get put on a shelf Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and get brought out again on Tuesday. Saturday supply gets put on a shelf Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Sunday supply gets put on a shelf Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So again, that's just thinking exponentially that, yes, we want to disinfect our goggles, and whether it's in a disinfectant solution like a bath where you just drop them into a bucket, or whether it's a rinse and clean, disinfecting is obviously the number one priority after use if you're going to use repeated goggles, but also allowing them to sit out for a duration of time if it's economically possible to have that large of a supply. it's just one more layer of defense in not handing your passengers goggles that may have been contaminated. The other option, and this has been discussed, and some drop zones are using it with success, others are not, is offering the Tandem student the opportunity to buy their own goggles, a souvenir to go home with, one-time use. And in the real world, it's actually not a bad idea because those goggles can be reused. If they go into the grocery store, they can put their skydiving goggles and their mask on and be perfectly protected to the best of their ability in that scenario as well. So those are what we see for passengers, is the question about the goggles, how do we provide them, how do we keep them clean, and then the question about their covering of their mouth and of their face. Some drop zones provide jumpsuits to their students. I think we're going to see less and less jumpsuits being provided because otherwise the jumpsuits will require more and more washing and more cleaning. So it's almost impossible to be able to logistically and effectively keep that level of equipment free and clear of germs every single day. So again, these are all decisions that the drop zone owners are going to make and that we as instructors are going to be affected by, and they all have their positives and negatives, and it's just take the time to think through them and to see which ones will work best in your environment. So here's the big question. What do we do with the gear? This is a question that has been asked pretty much since the day that we went on hold with skydiving. How are we going to come back and provide harnesses that are not infected? What can we do to disinfect the equipment we're using? And the truth, the hard, cold, unfortunate answer is there's nothing we can do to ensure that the gear is properly disinfected, thoroughly disinfected, or that the disinfectant process isn't necessarily detrimental to the Tandem process in general. And what I mean by that is that, again, the truth, the equipment was not built to be used and sanitized after every use. It'd be the equivalent of taking your car to the car wash every single time you drove it, right? You start to see paint coming off the car. You'd start to see damage to the seals of the car. Cars weren't meant to be washed and scrubbed 5 times a day, every day for 5 years. You'd see a much different car at the end of that 5 years than taking the car to the wash sporadically if and when needed. And that's kind of the analogy I'm bringing here, is that, again, just cold hard truth, this equipment was not built or intended to be washed and cleaned every day with chemicals and detergents. And that's not us, the manufacturers. We're taking raw materials and turning them into something really cool, a parachute. But those same raw materials are also being turned into uncool products like nets and sails and things like that. But the same holds true for anyone using this equipment, whether it's us or any of the other industries this webbing and fabric is used in, is that the use of chemical disinfectants is going to reduce the lifespan of the equipment over time. It's just inevitable. How quickly will it reduce the lifespan? That's something that we just don't know. And by we, I mean the Parachute Industry Association. They would be the collective knowledge base of all of the manufacturers, all of the rigging, all of the riggers within that process and within that organization, but also all the raw material manufacturers. Board on Forge, for example, CSR Webbing, I believe, is the big webbing provider. And there's webbing providers and hardware providers all over the world. And they've all come to a conclusion that the use of disinfectants is not a good idea. And I'll get to why in just a moment. But using disinfectants like Lysol long-term is not a good idea. You can use anything a few times and it won't be problematic. But if you were to disinfect a harness with Lysol 30, 40 times, no problem over the lifespan of the gear. But if you were to, and I shouldn't say no problem, much, much less of a problem than disinfecting it 1,000 times over the course of a season because you made 1,000 tandem jumps with that harness. You're going to do dramatic damage to the equipment with that level of exposure. It's also been noted that when the disinfectants and chemicals such as chlorine are exposed to cadmium-plated hardware, that the cadmium and the chlorine actually have a chemical effect such that the resulting fumes can actually be toxic to human beings. So who would have thought that cleaning a piece of metal with chlorine, because it's cadmium coated, could create such a negative health effect by trying to do one benefit of cleaning the harness, creating another negative offset of creating a potentially unsafe chemical reaction around the equipment. So I'll give you a quick little backstory on where all this came from. In the beginning, we, the manufacturer, UPT, were asked, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And the first instinct was, we don't promote it, but we understand it's going to happen. Just like Cessna doesn't say you can or can't fly your 182. We're not going to tell you you can or can't use your equipment during this time, because it's all free market, free ownership of equipment. You have the right to do whatever you want with the gear. So we looked into trying to answer the question, and the first ideal solution was alcohol. Of all the options we had, alcohol seemed to be the best answer for this. However, the concern then came up, well, if we impregnate the harness with alcohol and it's wet or damp, it's flammable. And if the aircraft were to crash and there was a fire, and our passenger or our instructor is wearing a flammable harness that has damp alcohol in it, we've now created an unsafe scenario, trying to create a safe scenario, that law of unintended consequences. And thankfully, aircraft issues are very, very rare, but they still do happen. So we were trying to think of that worst case scenario. So with that, on our short-term testing, we came to the conclusion that disinfectant spray like Lysol would be an acceptable use to disinfect the harnesses. And for the short term, it was. But the reality was, we hadn't had the time to think about the long-term effects. And there has been no long-term testing, because we've never been in this position before as an industry. So we conceded and reverted back to PIA, who is the industry standard. They are the true subject matter experts. And after consulting the webbing manufacturers, I believe, PIA issued this letter that you're seeing here that effectively says, minimal amounts of alcohol, make sure it's dry before you use it. If you're going to disinfect your harnesses, use alcohol, use it sparingly, let it dry before you go up. And if you go to PIA.com, www.pia.com, this letter is available for download. And Charles, Wade, I will email you a copy of this if you don't have it when we get done. And feel free to disseminate it to everybody as well in that medium, that capacity. So here's the concern with long-term use of disinfectants, aerosol sprays, Lysols, things like that, that if it's used repeatedly over time, in addition to buildup of like a residue buildup on the hardware, there's a potential, and I apologize, let me bring myself back. Let's rewind me the last 10 seconds. The last issue, or the last possible disinfecting probability that nobody wants you to use, is UV lights. You know, the idea of swabbing a UV light across a bottle of water and killing all the little nasties that are in there. It's been suggested that if we use UV light on the systems, whether it's like a tanning bed style or whatever you want to call it, that would kill the virus. And the answer is yes. It would, in all likelihood, based on what evidence we've seen, it would kill the corona. But the problem is that UV degradation at that level of exposure for that period of time, that repeatedly, is way different than the normal UV degradation that a tandem parachute or any parachute system would experience over a 10, 20, 30-year period. We've all seen the brand new sport rig that's nice, crisp black and white and blue and vibrant orange colors. And then 5 years later, the orange is yellow, the black is gray, you know, and the white is all faded out too. It's no longer brilliant. If you use UV light on disinfecting harnesses, you risk the possibility of harness failure, because you're weakening the system in a way that no one has ever tested it. No one has ever exposed it to that level of UV at that intensity that many times that quickly. So as it was explained by Roberto Montanez from PIA, the concern is, where will that failure happen? It won't happen on the ground. It'll happen up there in the sky. Opening shock could cause a 4-point stitch to fail. It could cause, any kind of fabric bar tacks could fail. It could cause any kind of webbing failure that we're simply just not aware of. So no UV, avoid the UV when it comes to disinfecting harnesses as a consideration. All right, so personal health. This is a pretty horrible picture, and I apologize for not prepping you for it, but that's what we can see. That's the viral exchange between the passenger and the instructor in a way that can physically be seen through nasal discharge, if you will. Snot. that's one example of all the little nasties that our passengers are capable of giving to us unintentionally through the acts of exit, free fall, drogue fall, and canopy flight. So when we're thinking about personal health, we have to look at it as a barrier from exposure. In everything we do, how many barriers do we have of exposure from ourselves and the passengers? And whether that means carrying a bottle of hand sanitizer in your swoop shorts or your jumpsuit so you can sanitize your hands after you got on the aircraft, each and every time you got on the aircraft, put your gloves on. That's just one example of something instructors can do for personal health. We talked about the full face helmets. We talked about the masks. We talked about wearing gloves. Everything we can do to maintain our personal health in terms of our equipment use, we should be looking at, and it'll be different for all of us based on where we are in the world. There are some commonalities, but there'll also be differences based on where we are in the world. So making sure that you're doing everything you can to increase your personal health through this COVID-19 process is critical. One of the biggest things we see at the drop zone these days is the whole process is changing. There's a lot of modifications to our business models that we're seeing in drop zones around the world, and many of them are similar to every other walk of life that we're now living through, whether it's going to the grocery store, going to the bank teller, going to the drop zone. The use of plexiglass shields between the manifest staff and the customers. We're seeing that at drop zones. We're seeing blue lines on the ground 2 meters apart to keep everyone at a safe social distancing distance. Ground personnel are wearing masks. They're wearing buffs. They're wearing handmade masks. So masking your ground personnel. One of your other potential patient zeros on the drop zone is your manifest person who's responsible for collecting payment and checking waivers. They're one of your frontline employees that is going to be exposed to everyone during the day. And then at the end of the day, they may be hanging out with you, having a beer at the end of the day and becoming the infective agent at that time. So doing what you can to protect your ground staff, the ones that are emptying the trash, mowing the lawn, protecting your packers, making sure your packers have social distancing if possible between each other as they're packing their parachutes. And going back to my message earlier about, if possible, limiting the amount of equipment that crosses between instructors and packers. So understanding that how we're handling the gear now today is going to be slightly different. I probably should have highlighted aircraft considerations and pilot considerations, because those are two often neglected ones when it comes to skydiving. We get so caught up in our own lives, right? We want to be able to jump. How do I keep myself safe from my passenger? But let's not forget the pilot. Our pilot, just like our manifester, but probably more so than anyone, risks the greatest level of exposure to COVID-19, in my opinion, than anyone else on the drop zone. Because if you go back to the fart in the aircraft analogy before, viral transmissions in a closed aircraft, whether it's climbing to altitude, everyone in that aircraft is breathing, including the pilot. And as viral transmissions get swirled around inside the aircraft, our pilot is the only one that day that was on every load and had contact by breath of every person that made a skydive that day. So whether it's something simple, and I think this is also going to be the new norm for skydiving operations, is a mask oxygen system. And you've seen them, not the halo masks, but they're light green, translucent masks that EMTs might put on people, better than a nose cannula, because you want to block the mouth, you want to block the nose, in theory, based on what other experts have said. So working out a comm system mic so that the pilot can fly with a mask on whenever anyone's in the aircraft with him, I think we're going to see more and more of that. And Glenn Singelman, I'm sure you guys know Glenn, he is my halo guru. If there's anyone that I know in Australia that can answer that question and can help develop that kind of scenario, I don't want to offer him up without him being on the call here, but he's my guy I go to every time I have an oxygen question. So I would definitely recommend consulting him or someone like him in the aviation industry to make sure we're protecting our pilots. Some aircraft will allow for plexiglass bulkheads to be put in between the pilot and the jumpers. Others will not. Some aircraft can't, like a 182. You can't box your pilot into left-hand corner of the 182 for 8 to 10 hours a day. So some aircraft that'll be more feasible than others, but think about your pilot's health and what you can do to make your teammate well and keep him well throughout him or her throughout the process. Because if your pilot goes down, we all have to become golf instructors. Without the airplane, we can't do what we do. So making sure that our pilot is taken care of. And in terms of aircraft considerations, I'm sure a lot of you guys know Dan BC out at Paris. Dan found a disinfectant for the aircraft that was FAA approved. I don't have the name of it, but I'm sure, Charles, if you shoot him an email, he'd be happy to give it to you. That at Skydiving Paris, they're disinfecting the aircraft in between loads as well. Another risk mitigation step to help reduce the transmission. So making sure you have a clean aircraft to operate in, because that's really the petri dish of exposure. On the ground, you can tell people to pack outside. You pack over there, you pack over there. You can tell people they can't come in the office because it's COVID-19 season. You can keep them out of the office. You can digitally waiver them. You can do everything you want to separate them until it's time to get on the aircraft. And one of the other constants in this is that it is not economically feasible. Any of you guys that own aircraft or pay tack time on one, it is not economically feasible to socially distance in a multi-million-dollar aircraft. Yet the aircraft is where everyone is going to go back to being skydivers, being plunged back together again like sardines. All the social distancing that you've done up until this point to get them safely to the aircraft is all undone the moment they all get in the aircraft. So that's just the brutal reality of what we're doing. We're trying to keep it as clean as possible outside the plane and distanced as possible. But once we're on that plane, we're going to be tight, close with each other. So try to do your best to keep the plane as clean as humanly possible. And while we're talking about the aircraft, I think I told you guys earlier today, I just got recurrent on Tandem for the first time in 18 years. I've gone over 90 days without making a Tandem jump. And I was so thoroughly impressed with Skydive DeLand's risk mitigation procedures, all the things we've talked about here, equipment handling, ground ops, aircraft considerations, everything was amazing. I felt so good about it. I had my buff, my full face helmet, my gloves, my lens was down. And what happened on jump run? I saw everybody doing four-way, doing their hand gestures with each other without gloves on. It's like, no. So that's my mission for 2020, is to stop the hand slaps in the aircraft. We're not shaking hands anymore on the ground. We're no longer doing the high fives in the airplane. So if you take nothing else away from the hour that we've been here together, no more high fives or no more hand slaps in the aircraft. We got to figure out another way to communicate with each other and get psyched up for our jumps. So moving down to customer social distancing, we covered a lot of that. Blue strips on the ground, like we see at banks and grocery stores, identifying areas for people to sit in, to having waiting areas that allow for spreading out, having hand sanitizer available in these social distancing locations is also critical. I've mentioned more than once masks and buffs. I'll just reiterate here with this one photo. I love my company. I love UPT. We're always thinking about ways to help the community that we work in, live in, and are part of. And one of our marketing representatives, Riley Marshall, we were talking about how are we going to help the community? What can we do? And she said, let's get buffs. With our buying power, we can buy them cheaper than anybody else in the world, most likely. It's one drop zone versus a global company that works around the world. So we managed to buy them in such bulk that they're $1 a piece. So we're actually selling them basically at cost for 100 packs for $100. And we've already sold over 20,000 of them. These are not the viral answer. These guarantee no protections, no different than any other buff, but it is a step in the right direction. So, and again, this is not a profit center for us. We're trying to do something great for the community here. If you want them, it's in our gear store, uptvector.com, 100 buffs for $100. We are shipping them internationally, so you would be responsible for shipping charges. Whether it's the 100 for 100 hours or your own, having branded buffs for your customers to go home with is another great idea, or masks. Have one of those available. We have riggers here locally, 2 of them, that are making these masks for $8 or $10 a piece, and they're selling those as well to the customers if they forget their own masks when they come into the drop zone. Okay, I'm trying to stay on point here, keep it in an hour. So risk mitigation. What are the things we can do to lower our risks of COVID-19 exposure in tandem skydiving and in skydiving in general? Well, sanitation, and that's not just putting hand sanitizer out for everybody, but also having a sanitation plan available or on file with your employees, with your teammates, with the coworkers. People got to go in and clean the bathrooms normally. Now they got to go in there and clean them extra carefully with the doorknobs, handles, things like that. Those hand blowers are the worst thing in the world for viral transmissions. They blow them all over the room versus being able to dry your hands with paper towels. Just throwing that out there. Whether it's the pens that people are signing their waivers with, making sure they have clean pens, that those are sanitized. Think outside the box. This is just a conversation to encourage you to start thinking about some creative, great ways you can increase your sanitation, increase ways to keep things clean and safe at your location. Plexiglass separation wherever you can, with your manifest, maybe with your pilot, anywhere else, your food concession. Consider single-use items as long as they're good for the universe, good for the environment. The idea of customers going home with their goggles, they have a souvenir they can use in other parts of their life. Always looking at your spatial separation on the ground, making sure people don't violate social distancing. Good hygiene has always been a foundation of skydiving, or at least tandem skydiving in general. Always trying to make sure we stay as clean. Our instructors are washing their hands. They're using hand sanitizers. And human beings have very short attention spans. So I believe that signage is critical, that reminders, putting up signs to remind people of what their obligations are. Your customers have obligations to you to keep you safe. You have obligations to them to keep them safe. So putting these signs up, reminding people, wash your hands, sanitize, use hand sanitizer, don't congregate in large groups, things like that. Avoid touching your face, whatever it might be. Putting signs up around the drop zone, lest we forget. Because the longer this goes on, the more comfortable we're going to get with it, and we're going to start breaking down on some of these policies and procedures. So then just to recap what I said, considerations versus recommendations. We're not experts in viral transmissions at all. To the contrary, I can barely spell viral transmission, let alone know anything about it. If I had to spell it on this, it'd be misspelled on my PowerPoint. So what we've offered is considerations, just things for you to think about. If you choose to use them, you choose to use them at your own discretion, your own risk, and we make no warranty that any of this will actually work. So just keep that in mind. These are all best guesses based on what other subject matter experts have either said in the news, researched articles that we've read, but we are not the source content of this. I'm not the source content of this. And then I put in a piece here. All of this could be an exercise in futility. And what I mean by that is you can follow all of these procedures, come up with your own. The virus is still going to spread. And that doesn't mean you've failed to prevent it. It's the nature of the virus. I learned an expression once. The French have an expression. It's in the nature of glass to break. It's in the nature of viruses to spread. All we can do is the best we can do to try to limit that spread, limit that exposure. And these considerations will not stop anything, but they may limit the exposure rate of this virus to you, the people around you, your friends, and even your new friends, the customers that are coming through for your tandem jumping every day, every weekend. So whatever we can do is fantastic, but never lose sight of the fact that none of this is a guarantee. Every one of us is assuming a risk by going back to skydiving. Every one of us is assuming a risk to do a tandem skydive in the COVID-19 new normal. Your instructors, your customers, people that work with them. I mentioned again, I got current today at my home drop zone, Skydive to land. Extraordinary operation, extraordinary people. My decision to get recurrent today was based on one simple fact, and whether it was logical or not is open to debate. As of today, there are 662 cases of COVID-19 in my county. My county, it's a cluster of about 4 cities. There's 560,000 people that live in that community. So of the 560,000 people in my community, 660 of them have been diagnosed with COVID-19. And that's not to say there aren't more undiagnosed, but the numbers show that 1,000th is 0.001% of my community, including all of my friends who I care very much about at Skydive to Land. We are that low of an infection rate in this area. I am very comfortable with that percentage. I chose to go to the drop zone, exercised all of my risk mitigation procedures that I've made for myself. The drop zone incorporated all of their risk mitigation. And the only exposure time that I didn't feel good about was in the aircraft, the inevitable putting everyone together, as I said. And with that one exception, the hand slaps before they exited, everybody was exercising their social distancing to the best of their ability. And under that context, the risk of me making a skydive today was such that I felt not just comfortable about it, but I felt good about it. I felt good about where we were going. I could get COVID-19 by going down to the mailbox at my apartment tomorrow morning to check the mail. I could get it at the drop zone. I could get it at the gas station. I put on a glove to pump my gas because that's better than not wearing a glove. I wear a mask when I go into the grocery store because I've been told that is better than not wearing a mask, but none of that is a guarantee this is going to work. We're all skydivers. We probably as a population understand risk mitigation and the consequences of what we do better than anyone else in the world, because every time we make a skydive, we're utilizing that skill set. So just understand that none of this is a guarantee. We all have different risk tolerances. It's okay to not skydive right now. That's another thing. It's okay to say, no, the risk is too great for me. I live at home with my parents potentially, and I could risk an exposure to them. I could be fine, but if I'm living with someone who's 75 years old or something, I may feel that the percentages are good for me, but I don't want to risk that for a loved one. But I'm not in that position. My partner Julie and I were both young, healthy, and that consideration wasn't one of my considerations, but I did think about it as I thought of every other consideration. So never lose sight of the fact that what we do goes against every possible good standard for social distancing. But that's okay, meaning that it's the nature of what we do. We haven't changed the nature of what we do to become anti-social distancers. This is the way we were before social distancing became a problem. Airlines are choosing to go back to work. They're choosing to fly. You've all probably seen pictures of airplanes full of people. They might be on a reduced schedule, but they're putting hundreds of people in recirculated air tubes, aluminum tubes with recirculating air, and flying them for hours across countries. I'm not sure about international flight right now, but aviation is flying. We are an aviation industry. And again, I speak only as myself, not for my company, but I think everyone has the right to make their own decision on what their risk reward tolerances are in this capacity, as long as they do it responsibly to the best of their ability. And at the end of the day, let's not judge each other either, because we're all in different situations. Some people may have to go to work because they have to pay their rent or put food on their table. Others do it because without it, their life is lacking and they're choosing to go make a skydive. It's worth the risk. A lot of us will choose to skydive. A lot of us will choose not to. So we've all been on social media, thumbing through Facebook, listening to all of our high school friends, all of our college friends, all of our skydiver friends who all of a sudden we start seeing expertise in different areas. Let's try to lay off the COVID-19 chastising or bullying of each other as we proceed on as a community. We're all one love, one community, and remember that. So in conclusion, as instructors, we're going to be coming out of uncurrency probably for the first time ever. And I'm sure a lot of you are gone 30 days without making a tandem jump, 60 days, and that's never happened, especially I think about the guys down in Wollongong, you know, where year round just cranking out thousands and thousands of tandems. I couldn't imagine being that busy, that good at tandem, that's being that busy with it, and then it stops for a month. Like, wow, what do you do? So whether it's Wollongong, the Gong, or whether it's a drop zone that's a 182 that only does weekends, there are going to be different levels of instructors, experience level, time in sport. And just remember that you could have 10,000 tandem jumps, 15,000 tandem jumps, and have a 20-year career in it. You're just as susceptible to uncurrency as the next guy or girl. Nobody's above the recurrency curve. At least I've yet to meet anybody that is. So take your recurrency seriously, whether it's reviewing your standard procedures, reviewing your emergency procedures, whatever the APF's process is for getting current. Look at it as a wonderful opportunity to go back to the basics, relearn the things you did. And yeah, I think that's why I wanted to end with recurrency requirements, because my one fear in the position I'm in is that now we're going to see a spike in incidents because instructors don't want to do the recurrency jumps. I've been doing this for 8 years. I've been doing this for 6 years. I did 1,500 tandems last year. I don't need to do an experienced skydiver or a solo jump or whatever the recurrency is. I'm just going to take a passenger. and then they're going to do something and have an incident or an accident. That's my biggest fear as we come out of this, is the complacency of our past successes might negate some of us from being willing to follow the expectation of doing a good, thorough recurrency. And so the way I look at it, I'm the Tandem program director for United Parachute Technologies. If anybody wanted to make an argument, it'd be me. I'd say, I do this for a living. I've been doing this for 20 years. Skydiving, I've been working in this position, this type of position for the last 10 years. I'm uber current. I stay current year round all year. I don't need to do a recurrency jump. But then I also said, if I don't do a recurrency jump, there's no reason for anybody else to either. And truthfully, I was excited about it. I was stoked to go skydive with one of my friends, Greg Rao, my teammate at the company. I said, let's go make my jumps. I want to get recurrent. And it was great to know that I had gone through the process. It felt really good that go through the SOPs, go through the EPs, go back to the basics, remind myself of the things that I learned 18 years ago. And I just say it that way. If I can do it, there's no reason that anyone else should balk at it. I'm certainly not the most experienced tandem instructor in the world, or the best by far. I'm just someone who believes in the standards and tries my best to follow them and encourage others to do so. So that's my soapbox. I've been talking for an hour and 8 minutes. I apologize. I think I ran late. I'm happy to answer any questions. I hope this was of value to you guys. I really enjoyed the opportunity to share the information, and I'm done. I'll sit, and any questions you have, let me know.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. That was great. Always a pleasure. Does anyone have any questions?
I got a couple of questions for you, Tom. How you doing, man? Hey, Tom, I would like you to elaborate a little bit more, if you could, on the alcohol for cleaning the rigs. I know you don't recommend alcohol to cleaning the rigs because, you know, like as you said, it can become a fire hazard and stuff. But what type of, did UPT actually done any testing, or we are fortunate or unfortunate, you can put it both ways, to have the capacity to have the rig sitting for some time, you know, like as you know, we got over 70 Tandem systems on a rack here, and you know, we're gonna be jumping very little. So we could be cleaning them with alcohol and letting the rig sit for some time. So you have any more on that you could share with us?
So unfortunately, I don't have any personal experience with the alcohol cleaning. PIA has done research and done some testing on that. And what I'll do, Alex, is I will send Charles contact for Roberto Montanez. He's the president of PIA. He's the one that's best capable of explaining what testing was done. And there's actually multiple types of alcohol, like isopropyl and ethanol. There's different alcohols that I can't even begin to describe. So making sure it's the right type of alcohol and the right duration of its use, I think would be the appropriate thing. And like I said, I apologize for passing the question off, but I don't want to speak from a position where I don't have a good answer for you, but I know someone who does. So, and I'm sure he'd be happy to share that with you.
Cool, thanks.
And Alex, since I have your email, I'll CC you on the email too, and I'll introduce you to Roberto directly as well.
Cool, thank you, I appreciate it.
Awesome.
Very good. There we go.
Wade, Gary Knapp here, Tom.
Hey, Gary.
Can you hear me okay?
5 by 5. Always wanted to say that.
A couple of things that come to mind that weren't in the presentation was testing, which I notice, you know, when we see all the stuff on the TV in Korea and places like that, obviously the temperature testing that they're testing people with as they enter the school or supermarket or wherever it is. So that's an opportunity that we can look into, is actually testing people as they're getting off the bus and moving into the skydiving operation. Testing,
that's a great point.
Yeah, testing technology. I don't know how far it's moving. I mean, obviously moving very quickly, but I have heard on the news about the testing moving to the stage where you can do a test and find the result within an hour. So obviously that's going to be a huge step forward for every facet of this COVID thing, but particularly obviously in our skydiving community. So keeping our eye on that. I'm also go to a local petrol station here where they supply latex gloves. That's another thing that we can throw into that mix. When people come, they could get a pack with your branded skydiving center pen. Here's a Skydive AZ one. The pen, latex gloves, a cloth mask, a mask that's maybe specifically designed for the tandem jump itself, which they can get to keep afterwards. But maybe a little pack that, because if they have latex gloves as well, they sanitize, then they put latex gloves on, a cloth mask, or all this stuff can be branded, so it's kind of advertising for you out in the big wide world. So yeah, just another idea there.
Well,
And
that's great,
also
Gary.
I made a note along the way of on-site laundry. I know a lot of the big drop zones have got their own. Skydive AZ got a big laundry there, but having an on-site laundry as well. So that's just a couple of things that came to my mind.
There are a few drop zones that are doing daily temperature checks for their fun jumpers and their instructors and customers, and they're giving a color-coded wristband. So on Monday it might be orange. They've tested everybody's temperature. Tuesday it's red. Next day it's yellow. So they can't use the same one every day and try to sneak back in if they're not feeling good.
Right.
All right, very good. Thanks, Gary. Anyone got anything else?
A quick question, maybe more for Wade and the APF than Tom. Talking about restarting again, is it a lot of operations are going to have to put loads up with just the tandem masters and the camera guys and whatever? Was there any thought of maybe the APF funding, for want of a better word, like a recurrency load for each operation?
That's probably out of my realm. Richard, are you there? Do you want to answer that one?
Immediate yes or no, obviously, but something to help. Everyone's short of cash, obviously, and your operators are possibly worse than the tandem masters at the minute. They'd be hurting for lack of income.
Yeah, look, that's the APF are looking at various funding, but remember our funding is zero as well, so we've got no money coming in. I think the other point to remember is, as many CIs have said, we need to make sure all our clubs survive. We also need to make sure the APF does, because if we don't survive and you all get through, then you can't operate anyway because you don't have an APF to sponsor you through CASA. So look, that's the negative view of things, but we are still looking at that, Phil. But I think it's such a state-by-state issue and drop zone by drop zone. I mean, you've probably heard, but there was some activities have already kicked off in Western Australia, Northern Territory fire up in about 10 days. I suspect Victoria will be very last on the list and may not get going till July. So it's really hard for us to get involved in too many specifics of getting people going. I think it really is going to be a club by club thing and a state by state thing.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Thanks, Phil and Richard. Does anyone else have any comments or questions?
Just one thing I might add, because I've been working with a drop zone overseas regarding this very issue, and I contacted the Department of Health, right, regarding the testing, along the lines of what Gary was talking about, and we found for about $4 to $6 a COVID-19 test that actually takes 15 minutes to let you know what's actually going on, right? So if I have a look at the information they sent me, it's a test that basically lets you know whether the person is healthy, if they've been infected by a virus and are recovered and have antibodies, and then obviously the early stage, which is basically where they're infected and there's still no antibodies, right? So this is this comes from a laboratory that's been approved for supply in Australia, and as I said, it's around $4 to $6 US to be able to administer this test. and the test results come back in 15 minutes. All right, so that's something that I'm sort of looking at the moment with one of the other drop zones that I'm working with that may be of interest as more information comes to pass.
Wow, that's a step forward for sure. Absolutely.
Cool. Yeah, well, as I said, you know, this information is coming straight from the Department of Health. The actual test kit that I found is actually being approved under the Therapeutic Goods Act. So it'll be good to see, you know, whether we can actually get this thing in and start using it. So,
can it be administered by anyone?
No, so depends on the country. In Thailand, where I've been talking to one of the guys about it, we'll probably get somebody that has the appropriate qualification to deal with pathology or to deal with, or that is a nurse. You know, and you know, we're considering actually having one staff member on site to be able to do this, and then within 15 minutes we'll know exactly what's going on. So that's a little bit of homework and research that I've been doing while I've been in lockdown, but it's looking pretty positive at this stage.
Awesome, thanks Ozzy. That's awesome. Does anyone have any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I'd like to just chime in on the currency issue. Just in addition to the currency thing, I know that you know, we're about to throw a whole bunch of new procedures into new parts into our procedure in the aircraft and stuff like that. I know that when I'm jumping, when I'm doing tandems, I stick with a routine. That's what I think is what keeps me safe, is what is sticking to a routine. I'm going to be coming back 3 months out of currency. B, I'm going to be throwing a bunch of different things into my new routine. Just something to reconsider for all those people that are considering, you know, whether they need to do a currency jump. Do some currency jumps with all of these new implementations put in there and see the distraction. Where this highlighted for me is I noticed the highlight when I first started doing hand cam many years ago. I was super current at the time, but just putting the camera on my hand, the distraction was overwhelming. It was unbelievable. I really noticed it in the air. I was going, wow, this is an extra part of workload. We're throwing a whole bunch of stages into our procedure now that's going to have to happen pretty much all at once. Need to consider that when you're looking at your currency, your routine. I just wanted to put that in there.
Yeah, thanks, Sass. That awesome points, great points. I had the same thing when I started doing hand cam, exactly the same thing. Was surprised at the amount of distraction such a small thing compared to what we all see today as a small, but when they first started the hand cam, yeah, it was a huge distraction. And
I think given that it's totally unprecedented, it would be quite acceptable for it to be made mandatory, and implementing new procedures, and, you know, really making it, it would be very sensible to do that if I was running a drop zone.
All right, guys and girls, we better keep moving along as we've got another special guest here. Tom, thank you so much for joining us yet again.
Wade, always a pleasure. I got a question on chat. You guys did record this, correct?
Yeah, we did, yep.
Yeah, so you'll have it available afterwards if anybody wants it.
Yep, absolutely.
Perfect.
Thanks, Tom.
Excellent.
Good on you.
Great.
Appreciate
guys,
it.
always a pleasure. Hope it was of value. Hope you got something out of it. I'm available, Tom at uptvector.com with any questions, concerns you might have. I'm going to sign off on this one. Do you need me back after the next one for more questions, or do you think we're good to go?
We'll let you get your beauty sleep, Tom. That's all good.
All right, yeah, just getting late. It looks like I need it. I got bags under my eyes. So thanks, guys. Look forward to seeing you in 2021 next time I'm down in Australia. Till then, be safe, and thanks again for everything.